our slightly tongue-in-cheek theme of WTF, which has one meaning if you're under 15, but for most of us, we call it "What's the future?" And today, what we're going to be discussing is what is an electrical grid, what's going on with the electrical grids, and why does it matter not just to industry but to every end user. I'm joined by three people who hopefully have read a few chapters more than I have. And actually, I'm certain they have, and they understand what's going on in the world of grids or electrical wires or whatever, all the other stuff we're going to talk about. I'm joined by Lucy.
Hey.
Ruth.
Hello.
And Niall.
Hi, afternoon.
They do have surnames and they do have companies that they work for, but we'll let you actually find that out yourself. That's part of the puzzle for today. So listen, we'll start off really quickly. And Ruth, I guess you will be my first go-to person as someone who has sort of entered into this grid story only recently, having had a long, traditional, accomplished career in more the oil and gas energy. So to you, what is a grid?
So I guess traditionally the grid was just a way to get the electrons from the generator to the consumer. So obviously electricity is not a normal commodity. You can't store it, you can't transport it in a normal way. So the grid is just the infrastructure that was put in place to move the electricity generation from the producer to the consumer. And in Ireland, that was kind of set up in a way that it very much was sort of passive consumer and a few large generators on the system that were controllable and fossil fuel or conventional generators. And that's really the way the system is now still designed and is trying to catch up for the renewables that are being built on the system, which are not necessarily being built where the old kind of conventional generation was. So
right,
a lot of catching up there, yeah.
So it's interesting. We're ending back at renewable, but we started, didn't we? If my history is right, with the likes of Arden and Crusher. Was that the catalyst? Was that the catalyst for massive electrification in Ireland? We're talking now, obviously.
It was, yeah. So I think that was probably where the move from kind of local grids started to where we started as an island started to move away from kind of local grid kind of operation to more of an island based network. Now, there was probably a bit of a gap there, but traditionally it was sort of managed on a city basis. And then Arden Crusher was when they started the electrification of the island. And then from there, I guess, more kind of pump storage, kind of river run, and a lot of like peat and things like that started to come onto the system then.
So we'll come back to it later as we evolve the story, but it's amazing. So microgrids, we went from microgrids to a central grid, and now we're probably going back to microgrids. Maybe we should have stayed where we were. We would have been fine. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. So Lucy, you're going to join me now. And when we think about sort of what we had, we then think about what we need. And I guess we can't but avoid the word sustainable generation of electrons or electricity. And therefore, that's when we get into the era of this transition from fossil-based generation that Ruth mentioned to more variable types with all those challenges of sun, wind, and I guess a little bit of hydro as well. Is that where we are now, and what does it mean to the normal person?
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolution. So, going green isn't without its challenges, and Ruth and yourself touched on a few there. So we're moving from this model where you have traditional fossil fuel fired power plants, for example, pushing electricity to the consumer so that when I turn my light on, it is there. to more an evolved grid, like an energy cloud is a word that you'll see bandied around a lot. So you'll see prosumers, if you like, so large industrial clients with their own generation on site, much more variable renewable energy on the grid. I think AirGrid published yesterday for April, we had about 38% renewable energy on the grid in Ireland now. Now that, if it's not windy, there isn't any generation going on, and that causes a lot of issues with our traditional grids, particularly around things like frequency balancing, demand management. So that's where with this new evolved grid, people are looking to resiliency. So they're looking to what can they do on site to get their own generation, to keep costs low, obviously going down sustainability routes. They want to make sure that they're reducing their carbon emissions as much as they can, but also how can they better support the grid with grid flexibility, demand flexibility, either with batteries is one we see a lot, or some of the frequency programs that the AirGrid have rolled out to better support the grid with things like frequency balancing.
And obviously you've mentioned, and we did at the start because it's where we are, Ireland and the change, but you have an interesting perspective as well, because it's not that long since you came from North America. It's not unique to Ireland, right? This transition.
It is not. So this is a global transition. The uniqueness in Ireland is that we're ahead of the game for a lot of the other countries. So within LLX, we work globally with all of these grids, and most of them are actually looking to Ireland to build their demand response programs. So as they move forward and they get to the levels of renewables we're seeing already on the grid in Ireland, what problems are they going to face? How can they try and resolve that before it becomes an issue for that grid? So we're really a great size in respect to the size of the grid here, but also because of the amount of renewables we have here, great test case to show some of the advantages, but also the issues as we move forward and all of the other countries move forward with renewable energy generation and integration.
Isn't that interesting that you say? And of course, it should be as obvious as the nose in our face that a 5 million population, 3 hours one way, 3 hours north and south, that would be only a microgrid as part of a municipality in parts of the likes of North America. So yes, why wouldn't it be an exemplar? Hey, there's another new word. So Niall, you've been patient, you've been quiet. I'm going to ask you to qualify out something that has been mentioned twice already. This new word, or is it just a makey-uppy word that we just decided to make up? A prosumer. What is that in the world? What's that in the world, and why is it popping up everywhere?
Well, essentially, it's producer and consumer. So, let's make it simple. There's a lot of people getting solar panels on their houses at home at the moment, so they are producing electricity, but they're also consuming, pulling in from the grid as well at the same time when they don't have enough and it's at night time. So for prosumers, essentially, if you're at home or you have a business where you have an asset that will produce electricity and will also you also need to consume to you need the grid at times when that variable, as Lucy and Ruth talked, that variability of renewables at times. So you scale that up and you'll see, large energy users maybe connect into like a solar or wind farm or have, batteries on site. And actually, it's interesting to go back with what Lucy said about Ireland being an exemplar. There's actually a very good example of it. I think it was last week. So Poland has had a solar boom, but they generally have been like conventional plants on the grid run by gas or coal, and they actually tripped last week because they didn't have the kind of storage, enough fast acting assets on their grid built out to kind of manage it, like the kind of DS3 programs and stuff that Lucy talked about. So kind of being a prosumer, you're also helping the grid at times as well,
And I guess that also is a bit like any technology. It takes a period of time for that to be the norm initially, and we're still at it. That's the exception today. Is that fair to say? That
I think the norm, and I think also what do we value on the grid in this new grid? Like you say, what's the future? What do we need to put a value on? And probably what we need to put a value on, if decarbonization, sustainability, we want to be 100% green. We're 40% green. Like if you're to tear, let's take the mirage off, but we are 40% green. People say 100% is 40% green. So how do how do you put a value on like long duration storage and stuff like that, to store that green energy to use it at different times, or increase that, or make it like, incentivize people to want to store that energy, so what do you put a value on, what's important? Like obviously grid stability is important, and the greening part is important. So what do we want to put a value on this future grid, as you were saying, I think is a kind of an important question to ask, as opposed to, because we're led by carbon targets. Really, the grid is developed out through carbon targets now, more so than any kind of other driver.
And I guess there's a saying, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, never waste a crisis. And obviously with the spiraling and continuing to be high electricity prices for end users and businesses and stuff, are you finding through your observations and discussions that that's enough, and sort of the trigger, or one of the triggers, for people to become more part of this prosumer, let's generate a bit ourselves and let's draw a bit ourselves, or was it coming anyway?
I think yeah, it was coming, and people, bigger organizations were definitely, investigating how they could become part of this. But like, yeah, the ramp up in kind of electricity prices has definitely, like, shook a bit, probably the financial department and stuff like that, as to how can we, be nail down our costs, have cost certainty over a longer period. So, maybe like signing a 10-year agreement with a wind farm isn't as scary, because I know I'm going to be paying whatever 10 or 12 cents for that, and that side of thing, and then you can get real into the optimization of that. Then
I even see it with some of the pitches that people have for their solar panels on their roof. The return on investment has gone down from 7 to 8 years to 5 years, and people are more likely to get a short-term loan and stuff from it. So it's a nice way to. It's a nice way.
SSE yesterday announced like they're going to give people 34 cents for each kilowatt they export back to grid. So there's definitely there's definitely incentives there for people to kind of, and the suppliers are obviously seeing the same thing, that there's an incentive there when people want to kind of be involved in this and reduce their costs.
So you brought it up, so I'll just bring it along. You brought up the dirty word of money and finances, and I'll go back to Ruth, because I know a lot of the work that you guys possibly engage with is doing a lot of feasibility documents and consulting with grid operators and consulting, but it's all goes back to sort of the value of money, the availability of money, and the green money that we're hearing so much now of, with green deals and taxonomies and stuff. Is that just wishful thinking, Ruth, that now there's more, ticks of the boxes? If you are engaging in more prosumerism, you're getting fixed costs, longer terms. Where does the nasty word of green bonds and money come into this smart grid? If you could just talk to us a little bit about that, Ruth.
Yeah, I think maybe if we just take it back a step, and a lot of it is being driven by the Climate Action Plan, which has obviously been driven by kind of European and global targets. So, as the government policy is pushing for a greener system, and that isn't just to green up, but it's also to, like, part of the targets that we have in the Climate Action Plan is to try and accelerate our way away from dependency on Russian gas. So I guess the first point is just around managing the volatility in the energy price for consumers in Ireland. And I guess we wouldn't be looking to, or developers wouldn't necessarily be looking to invest in green solutions if it didn't make financial sense. So, the policy kind of sets the platform, but there needs to be ways for developers of generation to kind of make sense of that investment. So I think maybe from the point of view of large energy users as a prosumer, for example, if we're looking at on-site generation, which we do help quite a few kind of large energy users look at, they really need to be able to see the benefit of that. So if they put on-site generation, it isn't just to meet their own demand, because it might be intermittent generation if they are looking at renewable generation. So there could be more generation there than they necessarily need, and they need to be able to effectively sell that back to the grid. And going back to the Climate Action Plan, we're looking at 22 gigawatts of additional renewable generation on the system by the end of the decade. That's 5 times what we have now. So flexibility is huge for managing the grid. And flexibility comes in a large part from a prosumer, that they can offer demand flexibility. It can't just come from the generation side of things. And again, that needs to make financial sense. So there needs to be a market there for that demand flexibility, for investors to see this as a good place to do business, really.
And obviously, from, as Niall said, that even end users and stuff, solar panels and bits and bobs, the conflict in Ukraine just accelerated the need to get security of supply, fixed cost certainty and stuff. Is that right? It didn't create it. It just accelerated it of what was already a challenging transition. It just seems that everyone's talking now in all aspects of society about what we have to do to get more green electrons driving the economy, or maybe I'm just more sensitive to it because I'm in the digital infrastructure space, but it does seem that way. Everybody has a view, even taxi men.
Yeah, I guess like the plan was always
sorry taxi men or families of taxi men. That probably is inappropriate. We'll edit it out afterwards.
But it impacts everyone. The bottom line is it impacts everyone, so everyone gets to have a say on it because they are paying the energy bills. So everyone's opinion is allowed. But yeah, I think
22 gigawatts. I mean, let's go back to that. Say 22 gigawatts. For those that don't understand, which I don't, that's 22,000 megawatts of variable-based energy that's been blown out in the Irish Sea and shining down in Ireland, not just since yesterday, right? It's been there a very long time. And we talked about Ardna Crusher, didn't we? That's 100 years ago this year. I think it was an exemplar globally for that ilk of type of energy, and we did nothing since. I mean, my goodness, 7 years to get 22,000 megawatts. And if I'm right, we put 6 windmills into Arklow Bay 20 years ago. And in 2023, we now have a total of 6 windmills still in the sea. I guess I'll move to Lucy and say, having seen the great Texas and having seen what can and cannot be done in other places, how confident are you that we're going to execute our plan?
We have the drive to. I think we have the drive. We have the ability to, and it's not just. It's coming from not just from the government. It's coming from the companies themselves. As you said, there is an interest now in the electricity grid. How are we generating the energy? And that's the first step in getting to the target. Is you have to have a will to get there. We definitely do. We are putting processes in place. Companies, like we go back to data centers, these large, they're vilified in the press sometimes, but they have the opportunity to actually support the grid to get where we need to be. And they have the desire to do that too, and the financial backing to do it. So they are taking action to look at things like on-site generation to support the grid with that flexibility. As large energy users with a consistent load, they're able to do that by adjusting their demand or moving to on-site generation. They have concerns about resiliency. It was a Greco study, came out probably about 2-3 weeks ago, and of large energy users across Europe. And the number one thing across Europe, including in Ireland, that 60% of those companies were concerned about resiliency of the grid. If we turn the switch off, are we going to pay this? Are we going to have blackouts? Again, we've seen it in the papers like this last winter, the winter before, blackouts are coming. We're going to see some, because of increases in demand and the move to renewables. So these companies are looking now into on-site generation, backup CHPs, diesel generators, battery energy storage is another area. And then we have existing infrastructure in place. So Microsoft came out in the end of last year about utilizing the batteries that they have, existing technology on site, but using those and unlocking that resource to help support the grid from a frequency balancing perspective. So when we start with these companies that have that innovation approach, they're all about innovation, that's the ethos of their companies, and they turn their attention to this problem, they can unlock new solutions like utilizing the batteries within, so their grid interactive UPSs, to support the grid to get us where we need to go. And that's what we need, more of this discussion, more of this innovation, people looking at the problem and looking for solutions rather than finger pointing about where the problem came from.
So one of the things that would be perfect is that we'd have a straight line linear, turn off fossil, turn on renewable. That would be ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. So is it fair to say, like so many other aspects of our lives, somebody's playing music, it's lovely, but it's everybody hearing that gorgeous? Sounds like the ice cream man. I'll have a 99 if there's an order going in.
No, there's no ice cream man out here at the moment, no.
Right. He's gone anyway. So when we think about everything in our lives at the moment, it's nearly hybrid is the word. Hybrid cars, hybrid electrical generation and stuff. There's no getting away, Niall, from the fact that as we go through, and I think it's called the transition, I think even Ruth said it, as we go through this transition, we still need in reserve a fallback position in 2023 that if all others fail, there's no wind, there's no interconnects, there's no sun, we need to be able to turn on something to generate electricity so the hospitals, etc., and whatever else can still operate. So, is that where we are now? We're in that messy hybrid working out stage.
Yeah, absolutely. As I quoted earlier, like we're about 40% renewable, so 60% of that, more or less, predominantly that's going to come from gas, kind of reference targets for 2030 and stuff like that. Like on the electricity side, renewable side, the technology is there, wind, solar, battery. It is that gas part, and it's probably part, that hasn't been completely flagged as to how we are. There's no real policy in place to really decarbonize that. Because by 2035, they've came out last week on the long-term plan that they want a carbon neutral grid. So over the next 7 years, they're going to decarbonize 70% of the grid. And then the last 30% is essentially the gas bit. But, there's no real incentive subsidies plan, I would say, in Ireland to really go after and decarbonize that part, I would think.
Okay, so let's just wind back slightly, because society and grid users are like a layer of the onion. Yeah, there's different types and there's different layers on it. So and something that Lucy said there about some of the larger users, whether they're cement, pharmaceuticals, data centers doing innovative things. So let's say that without industry at all, just citizens in Ireland going through a transition from a fossil predominant based grid to more renewable, you would still need to have demand response, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
It's a fundamental part.
You need, they're all tools, and an operator of the grid, as Ruth described it earlier, can balance it and make sure it's stable. So you need different tools at different times to make sure the lights stay on, essentially.
So then you get industry, and industry are large electricity users, whether they're cement, pharmaceuticals, data centers. They're investing capital, as Ruth said, or Lucy may have said. 60% of those people, number one concern is keeping the lights on. Mm-hmm. So they're now starting to invest in making sure that they keep the lights on, not just for them, but for the grid. Are they the ones, the first movers on these prosumer type large demand response, as Lucy said, about opening up their batteries to assimilate being a BESS, which is needed for the grid anyway? So it's easier to open there where it's up than having to go and build.
it's not that they are first move. They have moved, and Lucy will speak to this because all their clients, clients currently, you know, provide, the similar service as a peaking power plant. You know, like, take from having to run on the grid. It's, you know, from a grid operator point of view, it's how much do you need and what's the cost of doing it and how that stacks up. You know.
So that's the key point. So even with citizens with no industry at all, you'd need, to your words there, so standby generation, peaker plants, whatever the term of the day is. You'd need it anyway.
On a renewable grid, you would.
Yeah, you'd need it anyway. So then it's about, well, who's going to build it, supply it? We need it, right? So are we saying then, Lucy, that you are starting to see industry build these co-located with their own industries? The grid needs it irrespective of their requirements. And there you're sort of getting that sort of balance of, well, I'll give if we can take, and you know, that sort of what we've prosumerism again, but the grid needs it irrespective of their particular requirements.
Yeah, you are most definitely seeing that, as Niall said. A lot of the clients that we have within the NLX portfolio, and that's grown, they're doing that to support the grid. I mean, some of it is, you know, they need more connections because their business is growing, and they know in order to get those connections, they have to support the grid locally. There are financial incentives for them to do it, but I can say the majority of companies I talk with, it's not the finances they're interested in. They want to be good grid citizens. They are concerned about resiliency, and they're concerned about grid, the resiliency for the communities they're in as well. So they want to see how they can utilize what they have on site, or if they're designing a new pharmaceutical plant, expanding what they have, a new data center, how can they do that in a way that's sustainable and doesn't affect the grid, and can actually benefit it locally by building in some of that flexibility that Ruth talked to. So that could be on-site generation, it could be plants, things that we can feed back to the grid, utilizing things like batteries if they have those on site to support the grid. Baringa did a really interesting study just about existing capacity. So looking at existing, in that case again, battery energy storage in large industrial electrical users in Ireland, and how if they were all utilized to support the grid with frequency balancing, you could actually avoid those peaking power plants, which would save CO2 emissions because obviously they're fossil fuel generated, save money because you won't have to purchase that fossil fuel, whatever that be, to fund those peaking power plants, but also they can unlock that for the grid. So there's a lot of study out there and research into how, you know, we can, the users here already can utilize what they have to support the grid.
So if I go back to Ruth just for 1 second, you mentioned earlier that we have some North Stars in Ireland right now. We've got both the Climate Action Plan, we have the decarbonisation of the electrical system and stuff. Are they fixed enough so that, as Ruth has said, corporations or communities even with a surety can engage with it, knowing the rules won't be changing, and we can sort of set a course and get it done? In your opinion, are we at that stage?
No, I think, like, in certain areas possibly, but I think the Climate Action Plan, for example, is effectively a roadmap, and as part of that it sets out hundreds of actions, and those actions tend to be around building up a framework or kind of clarifying policy or removal of barriers. So each kind of area, I think, is moving at different speeds. I think probably in certain cases they all need to move along at the same time, but I think from a resource and constraint, some things just kind of get delayed. So I think it's more the certainty comes from the actions from the Climate Action Plan being ticked off rather than the actual overarching ambition being put in place.
So in your opinion, and I'll ask the same question, it's a 20-second answer question because we've come to our time up. We're here in 3 years' time. What would you have loved to have happened between now and then? What's your bucket list on the grid to have happened?
Oh God, I think probably we need a lot more clarity around the future of offshore, so the phase 2 stuff. I think we need to see more clarity on the revenue streams for storage, from a flexibility perspective. And I think we probably need to see a bit more information around private wire and co-location. And again, that just is a possible option for kind of grid resilience if we open that up a little bit more.
Ruth? Sorry, not Ruth. Lucy?
I would second what Ruth said there. I think offshore, better development of the offshore, and then also looking at interconnection. So getting that interconnector to Europe so that we can have more resiliency on the grid here by balancing supply across Europe is going to be very important for the development of the grid here and the stability of the grid.
Niall, possibly for the first time in your whole career, you're going to have the final word.
Wow.
What do you say, man?
Oh, well, what do I say, Gary? I absolutely agree with what Ruth and kind of Lucy said. I suppose the other thing I'd like to see really is, how are we decarbonising that gas that's running, the plants that the plants that we need, to kind of keep in between when the wind and sun isn't shining. Like, what is the plan there? How are we going to support that? Is it cost effective? I think we need to, get that plan in place and kind of get things moving, because, if, you're only looking at another 10 years, then where you want to kind of fully decarbonize that part of the system after that.
Okay, fantastic. I think in summary, a grid is what brings electrons or electricity around Ireland. It's what actually is the oxygen that fuels the economy. We're in very much now in the transition stage where we're at 40% annual. We have to go to 80% by the end of the decade. There's 20,000+ megawatts being built or in development in some form. And the most important thing to remember is that it's ours to generate. So you can actually tick a lot of the security supply boxes. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining me, Lucy, Ruth, Niall. It's been informative. It's I guess we could come on here in a year and we might review what we said, and bits of it might be refined and bits of it might be the same. But thank you so much.
Unfortunately, probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, but some stuff happens in a year that you think will take a decade, and the reverse can be true as well. So let's surprise ourselves and have a happy Wednesday, because we're over the hill now. The week we're just over 2 minutes past 12:30. It's downhill to the weekend. Thank you so much for joining us at Bytes and Banter. Ruth, Niall, and of course that makes the magic happen in the background, Carla. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.